And I think we're live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the office of Mythical Ireland, if not the landscape where I usually broadcast from. So, tonight's live broadcast is a means of breaking the boredom for me anyway. And maybe for some of you as well. So today in Ireland, it was announced that all schools and colleges are to close for 2 weeks. And a lot of restrictive measures have been put in place around the coronavirus. So I'm going to be working at home. I've been working at home this week. I'm going to be working at home for the next fortnight. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time here. And I thought I would help to break my own boredom and help to break your boredom. It's not that work is boring, don't get me wrong. It's just, I think that it might just help take minds off the panic and the negativity and the fear that seems to be a big part of the whole COVID-19 story at the moment. There's nothing like a few stories to take your mind off things. I'm going to read tonight from a book that was originally published in 1912, written by Charles Squire. It's a very popular work. It was originally published as Celtic Myth and Legend, Poetry and Romance by the Gresham Publishing Company in London. And I'm going to read from a 1998 republication by Sennett, and it's retitled Mythology of the Celtic People. I propose to read a couple of chapters, and who knows, maybe we might get a bit of a discussion going. Don't forget that you can comment on the live video. I can read the comments to the side here, so that, after a while, if there are questions that you want to ask, they may prompt a little bit of a discussion on here that people can join in. The other thing is that this is a live broadcast. I can't pause it. I can only end it. There are 2 dogs and 6 other humans in this house. So if there are noises in the background, hopefully we can just ignore them. Anyway, I'm going to start with chapter 5, The Gods of the Gaels. And again, this is from Charles Squire. Of the 2 Celtic races that settled in our islands, it is the earlier, the Gaels, that has best preserved its old mythology. It is true that we have in few cases such detailed account of the Gaelic gods as we gain of the Hellenic deities from the Greek poets, of the Indian devas from the Rig Veda, or of the Norse Aesir from the Eddas. And I just should warn you that if there are butcherings of words and names, and my pronunciation isn't good, that is entirely my fault and nobody else's. Yet, nonetheless, may we draw from the ancient Irish manuscripts quite enough information to enable us to set forth their figures with some clearness. We find them, as might have been anticipated, very much like the divine hierarchies of other Aryan peoples. We also find them separated into 2 opposing camps, a division common to all the Aryan religions. Just as the Olympians struggled with the giants, the Aesir fought the Jotuns, and the Devas the Asuras, so there is warfare in the Gaelic spiritual world between 2 superhuman hosts. On one side are ranged the gods of day, light, life, fertility, wisdom and good. On the other, the demons of night, darkness, death, barrenness and evil. The first were the great spirits symbolising the beneficial aspects of nature and the arts and intelligence of man. The second were the hostile powers thought to be behind such baneful manifestations as storm and fog, drought and disease. The first are ranged as a divine family round a goddess called Danu, from whom they took their well-known name of Tuatha Dé Danann, tribe or folk of the goddess Danu. The second owned allegiance to a female divinity called Danu. Their king, Indech, is described as her son, and they're all called Danu's gods. The word Danu appears to have signified the abyss or the deep sea, and the same idea is also expressed in their better known name of Fomors or Fomorians, derived from two Gaelic words meaning undersea, Fomor. The waste of water seems to have always impressed the Celts with the sense of primeval ancientness. It was connected in their minds with vastness, darkness, and monstrous births, the very antithesis of all that was symbolised by the earth, the sky, and the sun. And of course, don't forget, Jung said that water was the eternal symbol of the unconscious. Therefore, the Fomors, I prefer to call them Fomorians, but Squire calls them Fomors. The Fomors were held to be more ancient than the gods, before whom they were, however, destined to fall in the end. Offspring of chaos and old night, they were, for the most part, huge and deformed. Some had but one arm and one leg apiece, while others had the heads of goats, horses, or bulls. The most famous, and perhaps the most terrible of all, was Balor, whose father is said to have been one Buranach, that is, the cow-faced, and who combined in himself the two classical roles of the Cyclops and the Medusa. Though he had two eyes, one was always kept shut, for it was so venomous that it slew anyone on whom its look fell. This malignant quality of Balor's eye was not natural to him, but was the result of an accident. Urged by curiosity, he once looked in at the window of a house where his father's sorcerers were preparing a magic potion, and the poisonous smoke from the cauldron reached his eye, infecting it with so much of its own deadly nature as to make it disastrous to others. Neither god nor giant seems to have been exempt from its dangers, so that Balor was only allowed to live on condition that he kept his terrible eye shut. On days of battle, he was placed opposite to the enemy. The lid of the destroying eye was lifted up with a hook, and its gaze withered all who stood before it. And if you're interested in more local connections with Balor in the Boyne Valley, you'll be very interested in my book Island of the Setting Sun, which is being reissued, hopefully in May, all going well. And I'll shortly, hint, be accepting advance orders on the website for that. Anyway, keep an eye on that. The memory of Balor and his eye still lingers in Ireland. The Eye of Balor is the name for what the peasantry of other countries call the Evil Eye. Stories are still told of Balor Beman, or Balor of the Mighty Blows, and Balor's Castle is the name of a curious cliff on Tuireadh Island, and I've been there. A fabulous place, an extraordinary little island off the coast of Donegal with precipitous cliffs and rock faces. This island off the coast of Donegal was the Fomorian outpost upon earth, their real abode being in the cold depths of the sea. This rule, however, as to the hideousness of the Fomors, had its exceptions. Elathan, one of the chiefs, is described in an old manuscript of magnificent presence, a Miltonic prince of darkness, a man of fairest form, it says, with golden hair down to his shoulders. He wore a mantle of gold braid over a shirt interwoven with threads of gold. 5 golden necklaces were round his neck, and a brooch of gold with a shining precious stone thereon was on his breast. He carried 2 silver spears with rivets of bronze, and his sword was golden hilted and golden studded. Nor was his son less handsome. His name was Bress, which means beautiful, and we are told that every beautiful thing in Ireland, whether plain or fortress or ale or torch or woman or man, was compared with him, so that men said of them, "That is a Bress." Balor, Bress and Elathan, I'm just keeping an eye just to make sure that there's nobody. Tony Campbell, hello Tony, and Jules is there, and Robin, hello to all of you, and Linda is watching from Phoenix in Arizona. Well, very good evening to all of you, and hopefully you're enjoying the story. Balor, Bress and Elathan I think it's pronounced Elathan, would be Elathan in Irish, are the three Fomorian personages whose figures, seen through the mists of antiquity, show clearest to us. But they are only a few out of many, nor are they the oldest. We can learn, however, nothing but a few names of any ancestors of the Gaelic giants. This is equally true of the Gaelic gods. Those we know are evidently not without parentage, but the names of their fathers no more than shadows following into oblivion the figures they designated. The most ancient divinity of whom we have any knowledge is Danu herself, the goddess from whom the whole hierarchy of gods received its name of Tuatha Dé Danann. She was called Anu or Anna, and her name still clings to two well-known mountains near Killarney, which, though now simply called the Paps, were known formerly as the Paps of Anna, the Paps of Anu. She was the universal mother. Well, she used to cherish the gods, says the commentator of a 9th century Irish glossary, attributed to Cormac, King Bishop of Cashel. Her husband is never mentioned by name, but one may assume him, from British analogies, to have been Bille, or Bille, known to Gaelic tradition as a god of Hades, a kind of Celtic dispater from whom sprang the first men. Danu herself probably represented the earth and its fruitfulness, and one might compare her with the Greek Demeter. All the other gods are there, at least by title. All the other gods are, at least by title, her children. The greatest of these seem to have been Nuada, called Arigatlov, he of the silver hand. He was at once the Gaelic Zeus, or Jupiter, and their war god, for among primitive nations, to whom success in war is all important, the god of battles is the supreme god. Among the Gauls, Camulus, whose name meant heaven, was identified by the Romans with Mars, and other such instances come readily to the mind. He was possessed of an invincible sword, one of the 4 chief treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann, over whom he was twice king, and there is little doubt that he was one of the most important gods of both the Gaels and the Britons, for his name is spread over the whole of the British Isles, which we may surmise the Celts conquered under his auspices. Oh, Barb is watching from Florida, Julia is watching in Norway, Vicky is in Oregon, and James is in Loughlin Island in County Down. Good evening to you all, and you're very welcome. We may picture him as a more savage Mars, delighting in battle and slaughter, and worshipped like his Gaulish affinities, Teutotes and Hesus, of whom the Latin poet Lucan tells us, with human sacrifices, shared in by his female consorts, who, we may imagine, were not more merciful than himself, or than that Gaulish Tyrannus, whose cult was no gentler than that of the Scythian Diana, and who completes Lucan's triad as a fit companion to the pitiless Teutates and the horrible Hesus. I hope I'm getting all of these. I didn't study all these names in classical studies when I was in school. Some of these names are very strange. Of these warlike goddesses there were 5. Fia the hateful, Nemon the venomous, Bab the fury, Magh, a personification of battle, and over all of them the Morrigan or Great Queen. This supreme war goddess of the Gaels, who resembles a fiercer Here, that's Hera, isn't it? Perhaps symbolised the moon, deemed by early races to have preceded the sun, and worshipped with magical and cruel rites. She is represented as going fully armed and carrying 2 spears in her hand. As with Ares and Poseidon in the Iliad, her battle cry was as loud as that of 10,000 men. Wherever there was war, either among gods or men, she, the great queen, was present, either in her own shape or in her favourite disguise, that of a hoodie or carrion crow. An old poem shows her inciting a warrior. Over his head is shrieking a lean hag, quickly hopping. Over the points of the weapons and shields, she is the grey-haired Morrigan. With her, Fia and Nemon, Bob and Magh also hovered over the fighters, inspiring them with the madness of battle. All of these were sometimes called by the name of Bob. An account of the Battle of Clontarf, fought by Brian Boru in 1014, that's 1014 AD, against the Norsemen, gives a gruesome picture of what the Gaels believed to happen in the spiritual world when battle lowered and men's blood was aflame. There arose a wild, impetuous, precipitate, mad, inexorable, furious, dark, lacerating, merciless, combative, contentious Bob, which was shrieking and fluttering over their heads. And there arose also the satyrs and sprites, and the maniacs of the valleys, and the witches and goblins and owls, and destroying demons of the air and firmament, and the demonic phantom host, and they were inciting and sustaining valour and battle with them. I think this is a little bit romanticised, to be honest with you. I don't think it was all that bad. When the fight was over, they revelled among the bodies of the slain. The heads cut off as barbaric trophies were called Magh's acorn crop. These grim creations of the savage mind had immense vitality. While Nuada, the supreme war god, vanished early out of the pantheon, killed by the Fomorians in the great battle fought between them and the gods, Bob and the Morrigan lived on as late as any of the Gaelic deities. Indeed, they may be said to still survive in the superstitious dislike and suspicion shown in all Celtic-speaking countries for their avatar, the hooded crow, or the hooded crow, the grey crow. After Nuada, the greatest of the gods was Dagda, whose name seems to have meant the good god. The old Irish tract called The Choice of Names tells us that he was a god of the earth, and he had a cauldron called the Undry, in which everyone found food in proportion to his merits, and from which none went away unsatisfied. He also had a living harp, and he played upon it. The seasons came in their order, spring following winter, and summer succeeding spring, autumn coming after summer, and in its turn giving place to winter. He is represented as of venerable aspect and of simple mind and tastes, very fond of porridge, and a valiant consumer of it. In an ancient tale we have a description of his dress. He wore a brown, low-necked tunic which only reached down to his hips, and over this a hooded cape which barely covered his shoulders. On his feet and legs were horsehide boots, the hairy side outwards, should I say. He carried, or rather drew after him on a wheel, an 8-pronged war club, so huge that 8 men would have been needed to carry it, and the wheel, as he towed the whole weapon along, made a track like a territorial boundary. Ancient and grey-headed as he was, the sturdy porridge-eater, it will be seen from this that he was a formidable fighter. He did great deeds in the battle between the gods and the Fomors, and on one occasion is even said to have captured single-handed a 100-legged and 4-headed monster called Mata, dragged him to the stone of Ben near the Boann, and killed him there. And of course, if you want to hear more about the Mata and his killing and dismemberment at Newgrange, you should refer to my book Mythical Ireland, New Light on the Ancient Past. I see there are some more people here. Marcel is in Kent in England. Good evening to you. James is mentioning Rebecca. He's inviting someone along. Barb, glad to hear how to pronounce the names. Don't rely on that 100%, Barb. Some of it could be wrong. Esther says she loves the Morrigan. Hello, Esther. And William is in from Huntington in Arkansas. Very good. So we have a real international audience tonight. The Dagda's wife was called Boann. She was connected in legend with the River Boyne, to which she gave its name, and indeed its very existence. Formerly there was only a well, shaded by 9 magic hazel trees. These trees bore crimson nuts, and it was the property of the nuts that whoever ate them immediately became possessed of the knowledge of everything that was in the world. The story is, in fact, a Gaelic version of the Hebrew myth of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. One class of creatures alone had this privilege, divine salmon who lived in the well, and swallowed the nuts as they dropped from the trees into the water, and thus knew all things, and appear in the legends as the salmons of knowledge. All others, even the highest gods, were forbidden to approach the place. Only Boann, with the proverbial woman's curiosity, dared to disobey this fixed law. She came towards the sacred well, but, as she did so, its waters rose up at her and drove her away before them in a mighty, rushing flood. She escaped, but the waters never returned. They made the Boann, and as for the all-knowing inhabitants of the well, they wandered disconsolately through the depths of the river, looking in vain for their lost nuts. One of these salmon was afterwards eaten by the famous Finn MacCool, upon whom all its omniscience descended. Omniscience. I apologise. I got that one wrong. This way of accounting for the existence of a river is a favourite one in Irish legend. It is also told of the Shannon, which burst like the Boyne from an inviolable well to pursue another presumptuous nymph called Sinan, a granddaughter of the sea god Lugh. And Wendy joins us from New York City. Hello, Wendy. I was in New York City in November last. The Dagda had several children, the most important of whom are Brigid, Angus, Midir or Midir, Ogma and Bob the Red. Of these, Brigid will be already familiar to English readers who know nothing of Celtic myth. Originally she was a goddess of fire and the hearth, as well as of poetry, which the Gaels deemed an immaterial, supersensual form of flame. But the early Christianizers of Ireland adopted the pagan goddess into their role of saintship, and, thus canonised, she obtained immense popularity as Saint Brigid or Bride. And that's just water. The whiskey's for later. It's not poaching. Angus was called Magh Og, which means son of the young, or perhaps the young god. This most charming of the creations of the Celtic mythology is represented as a Gaelic Eros, an eternally youthful exponent of love and beauty. Like his father, he had a harp, but it was of gold, not oak, as the Dagda's was, and so sweet was its music that no one could hear and not follow it. His kisses became birds which hovered invisibly over the young men and maidens of Erin, whispering thoughts of love into their ears. He is chiefly connected with the banks of the Boyne, where he had a brew or fairy palace, and many stories are told of his exploits and adventures. Midir, also the Midir, has a, there's no D there, but I know there's Lenitian because it's M-I-D-H-E-R or M-I-D-H-I-R. I presume it's Midir. Also the hero of legends, would seem to have been a god of the underworld, a Gaelic Pluto. As such, he was connected with the Isle of Folga, a name for what was otherwise and still is called the Isle of Man, where he had a stronghold in which he kept 3 wonderful cows and a magic cauldron. He was also the owner of the 3 cranes of denial and churlishness, which might be described flippantly as personified gentle hints. They stood beside his door, and when anyone approached to ask for hospitality, the first one said, "Do not come, do not come," and the second added, get away, while the third chimed in with, "Go past the house, go past the house." These 3 birds were, however, stolen from Midir by Aherne, an avaricious poet, to whom they would seem to have been more appropriate than to their owner, who does not otherwise appear as a churlish and illiberal deity. On the contrary, he is represented as the victim of others, who plundered him freely. The god Angus took away his wife Etain, while his cows, his cauldron, and his beautiful daughter Blonnet were carried off as spoil by the heroes or demigods who surrounded King Crohor in the golden age of Ulster. And that's that word there, that name there. I just want to make sure I point it out to the camera. King, you would say that's Conchobar. Pronounced Crohor. Don't ask. Some pronunciations are strange. Mello Nello says, how ya from France? Bonsoir. And Kristen Taggart is in Davis, California, and says, wonderful stories. Thank you, Kristen. Glad you're enjoying it. Where was I? Oh yeah, King Cruthor in the golden age of Ulster. Ogma, and I'm not sure whether there was a H in there that might make it Oma, like the writing Ohm. Ogma, who appears to have also been called Kermit, that is, the honey-mouthed, was the god of literature and eloquence. He married Eaton, daughter of Diancecht, the god of medicine, and had several children who play parts more or less prominent in the mythology of the Gaelic Celts. And remember here, just if you're confused by the terminology, that this was written in 1912. The Celts are an Iron Age people. Celtic is this phrase that's used broadly to describe anything pre-Christian in the Celtic nations, you know, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, etc. But he's really talking about the prehistoric deities, or the pre-Christian deities of Ireland. One of them was called Tuireadh, and forgive the dog, I think it's feeding time here. One of them was called Tuireadh, whose 3 sons murdered the father of the sun god, and were compelled, as expiation, to pay the greatest fine ever heard of, nothing less than the chief treasures of the world. Another son, Corpora, became the professional bard of the Tuatha Dé Danann, while 3 others reigned for a short time over the divine race. As patron of literature, Ogma was naturally credited with having been the inventor of the famous Ogham alphabet. This was an indigenous script of Ireland which spread afterwards to Britain, inscriptions in Ogmic characters having been found in Scotland, the Isle of Man, South Wales, Devonshire, and at Silchester in Hampshire, the Roman city of Caleva Atrebatum. Didn't do Latin, so it shows. It was originally intended for inscriptions upon upright pillar stones or upon wands, the equivalents for letters being notches cut across or strokes made upon one of the faces of the angle, the alphabet running as follows. And I'll just show you briefly a picture of the Ogham alphabet. Sorry, I need to move that into position. When afterwards written in manuscript, the strokes were placed over, under, or through a horizontal line in the manner above, and the vowels were represented by short lines instead of notches. A good example of an Ogmic inscription is given in Professor Rees's Hibbert Lectures, page 524, if you happen to have them at hand. But we won't discuss that any further. It comes from a pillar on a small promontory near Dunmore Head in the west of Kerry, and horizontally reads, Urk, the son of Urca, descendant of Modovinia. Well, there you go. The origin of this alphabet is obscure. Some authorities consider it of great antiquity, while others believe it entirely post-Christian. It seems at any rate to have been based upon, and consequently to presuppose a knowledge of, the Roman alphabet. Ogma, besides being the patron of literature, was the champion or professional strongman of the Tuatha Dé Danann. His epithet is Grianach, that is, the sunny-faced, from his radiant and shining countenance. The last of the Dagda's more important children is Bub the Red, Bub Jarog, who plays a greater part in later than in earlier legend. He succeeded his father as king of the gods. He is chiefly connected with the south of Ireland, especially with the Galtee Mountains, and with Lugh Jarog, where he had a famous She, or underground palace. The Poseidon of the Tuatha Dé Danann pantheon was called Lair, but we hear little of him in comparison with his famous son Manannan, the greatest and most popular of his children. Manannan mac Lir was the special patron of sailors, who invoked him as god of headlands and of merchants, who claimed him as the first of their guild. His favourite haunts were the Isle of Man, to which he gave his name, and the Isle of Arran in the Firth of Clyde, where he had a palace called Owen of the Apple Trees. He had many famous weapons: 2 spears called Yellow Shaft and Red Javelin, a sword called the Retaliator, which never failed to slay, as well as 2 others known as the Great Fury and the Little Fury. He had a boat called Wave Sweeper, although I've seen that translated as Ocean Sweeper, which propelled and guided itself wherever its owner wished, and a horse called Splendid Mane, which was swifter than the spring wind, and travelled equally fast on land or over the waves of the sea. No weapon could hurt him through his magic mail and breastplate, and on his helmet there shone 2 magic jewels, bright as the sun. He endowed the gods with the mantle which made them invisible at will, and that is called the Feth Fiada, the cloak of invisibility. Pardon me. And he fed them from his pigs, which, like the boar in the Norse Valhalla, renewed themselves as soon as they had been eaten. Of these, no doubt, he made his feast of age, the banquet at which those who ate never grew old. That reminds me too that Dagda was said to have kept 2 pigs in Newgrange inside Sheed and Broga, one of which was alive, ready for the slaughter, nicely fattened for the eating, and the other which was roasting on the spit. Thus the people of the goddess Danu preserved their immortal youth, while the ale of Gobnew the smith bestowed invulnerability upon them. Well, a little bit like today's poaching and whiskey. Hopefully it'll keep us safe from this coronavirus. It is fitting that Manannan himself should have been blessed beyond all the other gods with inexhaustible life. Up to the latest days of Irish heroic literature, his luminous figure shines prominent. Nor is it even yet wholly forgotten. Lovely. Gobnew, the Gaelic Hephaestus, I think it's pronounced, who made the people of the goddess Danu invulnerable with his magic drink, was also the forger of their weapons. It was he who, helped by Lugh, the divine carpenter, and Creidne, the divine bronze worker, made the armoury with which the Tuatha Dé Danann conquered the Fomorians. Equally useful to them was Diancecht, the god of medicine. It was he who once saved Ireland, and was indirectly the cause of the name of the river Barrow. The Morrigan, the heaven god's fierce wife, had borne a son of such terrible aspect that the physician of the gods, this is Diancecht, foreseeing danger, counselled that he should be destroyed in his infancy. This was done, and Diancecht opened the infant's heart and found within it 3 serpents, capable, when they grew to full size, of depopulating Ireland. He lost no time in destroying these serpents also, and burning them into ashes, to avoid the evil which even their dead bodies might do. More than this, he flung the ashes into the nearest river, for he feared that there might be danger even in them. And indeed so venomous were they that the river boiled up and slew every living creature in it, and therefore has been called Barrow, which means boiling, ever since. Let's check the messages. Monica is listening from Denmark. Absolutely lovely evening reading. Thank you, Monica. Glad you're enjoying it. Diancecht had several children, of whom 2 followed their father's profession. These were Magh and his sister Armage. There were also another daughter, Etan, who married Kermit or Ogma, and 3 other sons called Cian, Cehe, and Cu. Cian married Ethnu, or Ethna, daughter of Balor, the Fomor, and they had a son who was the crowning glory of the Gaelic pantheon. It's Apollo, the sun god Lugh, called Lawfada, which means the long-handed or the far shooter. It was not, however, with the bow like the Apollo of the Greeks, but with the rod sling that Lugh performed his feats. His worshippers sometimes saw the terrible weapon in the sky as a rainbow, and the Milky Way was called Lugh's chain. And if you want to see a further exploration of that and other old Irish names for the Milky Way, again, I refer you to my book, Mythical Ireland, New Light on the Ancient Past. He also had a magic spear, which, unlike the rod sling, he had no need to wield himself, for it was alive, and thirsted so for blood that only by steeping its head in a sleeping draught of pounded poppy leaves could it be kept at rest. When battle was near, it was drawn out. Then it roared and struggled against its throngs. Fire flashed from it, and once slipped from the leash, it tore through and through the ranks of the enemy, never tired of slaying. Another of its possessions was a magic hound, which an ancient poem attributed to the Fenian hero Coilche calls that hound of mightiest deeds, which was irresistible in hardness of combat, was better than wealth ever known, a ball of fire every night. Other virtues had that beautiful hound, better this property than any other property. Mead or wine would grow of it, should it bathe in spring water. This marvellous hound, as well as the marvellous spear and the indestructible of Manannan, were obtained for Lugh by the sons of Tuireadh as part of the blood fine he extracted from them for the murder of his father Cian. A hardly less curious story is that which tells how Lugh got his name of the Uldánach, the master of all arts. These are, of course, only the greater deities of the Celtic pantheon. They are divinities which answered to such Hellenic figures as Demeter, Zeus, Hera, Kronos, Athena, Eros, Hades, Hermes, Hephaestus, Aesculapius, and Apollo. All of them had many descendants, some of whom played prominent parts in the heroic cycles of the Red Branch of Ulster and of the Fenians. In addition to these, there must have been a multitude of lesser gods who stood in much the same relation to the great gods as the rank and file of tribesmen did to their chiefs. Most of these were probably local deities of the various clans, the gods their heroes swore by. But it is also possible that some may have been divinities of the Aboriginal race. Professor Rees thinks that he can still trace a few of such Iberian gods by the name as Naich, Ri or Rui, Corb and Be, but they play no recognisable part in the stories of the Gaelic gods. That is chapter 5, and chapter 6 is called Gods Arrive, which I may read momentarily, but for a moment I'm going to pause to see if anybody has any questions relating to what I've just been reading. Is there anything that I can answer for you or help you with? Just checking on the phone as well. Yeah. No questions so far by the looks of it. Don't forget to say hello and let us know where you're watching from. It's lovely to see all you folks dropping in, and just a reminder that this is a little bit of storytelling and myth telling. Hi, there's Tony Campbell. Hi, Tony. Just to counteract all the negativity and the worry and fear and all the craziness around the coronavirus and the situation here at the moment. Chapter 6. The Gods Arrive. The people of the goddess Danu were not the first divine inhabitants of Ireland. Others had been before them, dwellers in the dark, backward and abysm of time. Just going to scroll down to the bottom. Mello asks, do we have any idea when these stories were first formed? No, quite simply. Most of these stories were written down in medieval times, in the Middle Ages, by Christian scribes in the monasteries, in the great monasteries of Ireland. They had survived in oral form, certainly for centuries, if not for maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years. In my own work, I've drawn attention to aspects of the old myths that seem to pertain to knowledge of the ancient monuments and their alignments and the astronomical importance of them. So there's no doubt in my mind that some of these stories go way back into antiquity, but unfortunately there's no no, there's nobody saying, this story was first told, X, the annals try to describe the history of Ireland, but they were cobbled together in recent centuries. So I can't necessarily discuss their entire reliability. Paul is watching from Detroit. Still plague free, happy to say. Well, hopefully it won't turn out too bad, because the measures that have been put in place will reduce the interaction between people. That's why we're doing this. So we're doing it virtually. So we can't spread anything between us across the internet, can we? But anyway, good to see you, Paul. I think I've seen your name quite a lot, haven't I? Yes, top fan. You're a top fan, as indeed just above you is Esther Guggisberg. Esther has been a fan for a long time, and I know that Esther has a copy of Mythical Ireland, because she was one of the first people to buy it and was the first person to review it on Amazon. Thank you for that, Esther. A lovely review, by the way. Yeah, so others had been before them. In this, the Celtic mythology resembles those of other nations, in almost all of which we find an old, dim realm of gods standing behind the reigning pantheon. Such were Kronos and the Titans, dispossessed by the Zeus, who seemed, even to Hesiod, something of a parvenu deity. Gaelic tradition recognises two divine dynasties anterior to the Tuatha Dé Danann. The first of these was called the race of Partholon. Its head and leader came, as all gods and men came according to the Celtic ideas, from the other world, and landed in Ireland with a retinue of 24 males and 24 females on the 1st of May, the day called Bealtaine, or Bealtaine as we would call it in Irish, sacred to Billa, the god of death. I'm not sure about that at all, by the way, that idea that Bealtaine is sacred to Billa. Billa is not... Billa doesn't, I don't think, features in the Irish pantheon. And maybe I'm mistaken, but I think that's a mistake. By the way, they weren't the first. The Partholonians weren't the first to arrive at Bealtaine, because the Milesians also arrived on the evening of Law Bealtaine, or the eve of Law Bealtaine, according to Laura Gawala, the Book of Invasions. At this remote time, Ireland consisted of only one treeless, grassless plain, watered by 3 lakes and 9 rivers. But as the race of Partholon increased, the land stretched or widened under them, some said miraculously, and others by the labours of Partholon's people. Very interesting. One wonders, were they agrarian, At any rate, during the 300 years they dwelt there, it grew from 1 plain to 4, and acquired 7 new lakes, which were fortunate, for the race of Partholon increased from 48. Which was fortunate, for the race of Partholon increased from 48 members to 5,000, in spite of battles with the Fomorians. These would seem to have been inevitable. Whatever gods ruled, they found themselves in eternal opposition to the not gods, the powers of darkness, winter, evil, and death. The race of Partholon warred against them with success. At the plain of Ith, that's Ith, Ith or Ith, Partholon defeated their leader, a gigantic demon called Kichol the Footless. Some of the names are funny. And dispersed his deformed and monstrous host. And by the way, if you think names are funny in mythology, sometimes these things are repeated in actual history. There's a very famous Viking who was involved, I believe, in the Battle of Clontarf, whose name was Sitrick the Squinty. So there you go. And I'm not making that up. That's in Matthew Stout's book about medieval Ireland, early medieval Ireland. Then, upon the same fatal 1st of May, there began a mysterious epidemic. Wow. Okay. Interesting. It's not the 1st of May, but there is an epidemic, which lasted a week and destroyed them all. This is the Partholonians. Partholon's people were destroyed by a plague. In premonition of their end, they foregathered upon the original first created plain, then called Shan Magh, or the Old Plain, so that those who survived might more easily bury those that died. Their funeral place is still marked by a mound near Dublin called Tallaght in the maps, and that is the district of Dublin called Tallaght today, but formerly known as Tallaght Muintir Partholon, the plague grave of Partholon's people. So there is a grisly and dark history, or mythology certainly, to Tallaght in Dublin, which was once the plague grave where all of Partholon's people were buried. This would seem to have been a development of the very oldest form of the legend, which knew nothing of a plague, but merely represented the people of Partholon as having returned after their sojourn in Ireland to the other world, whence they came, and is probably due to the gradual humorisation of the ancient gods into ancient men. Just realised something. Sorry. Forgive me. I have to send a message. I apologise. This is live TV for you. Following the race of Partholon came the race of Nemed, which carried on the work and traditions of its forerunner. During its time, Ireland again enlarged herself to the extent of 12 new plains and 4 more lakes. Like the people of Partholon, the race of Nemed struggled with the Fomorians, and defeated them in 4 consecutive battles. Then Nemed died with 2,000 of his people from an epidemic. Maybe I shouldn't be reading this with the coronavirus going on. From an epidemic. And the remnant, left without their leader, were terribly oppressed by the Fomorians. 2 Fomorian kings, Mork, son of Dela, and Conan, son of Febar, had built a tower of glass upon Tuatha Island, always their chief stronghold, and where stories of them still linger. And from this vantage point they dictated a tax, which recalls that paid in Greek story to the Cretan Minotaur. 2/3 of the children born to the race of Nemed during the year were to be delivered up on each day of Samhain. Goaded by this to a last desperate effort, the survivors of Nemed's people attacked the tower and took it, Conan perishing in the struggle. But their triumph was short. Mork, the other king, collected his forces and inflicted such a slaughter upon the people of Nemed that, out of the 16,000 who had assembled for the storming of the tower, only 33 survived. Only 30 survived, not even 33, just 30. And these returned whence they came, or died, the 2 acts being, mythologically speaking, the same. One cannot help seeing a good deal of similarity between the stories of these 2 mythical invasions of Ireland. Especially noticeable is the account of the epidemic which destroyed all Partholon's people and nearly all of Nemed's. Hence it has been held that the 2 legends are duplicates, and that there was at first only one, which has been adapted somewhat differently by 2 races, the Iberians and the Gaels. Professor Rees considers the account of Nemed to have been the original Celtic one, and the Partholon story, the version of which the native races made to please themselves. The name Partholon, with its initial P, is entirely foreign to the genius of Gaelic speech. Moreover, Partholon himself is given by the early chroniclers ancestors whose decidedly non-Aryan names reappear afterwards as the names of Fir Bolg chiefs. Nemed was later than Partholon in Ireland, as the Gaels or Milesians were later than the Iberians or Fir Bolgs. These Fir Bolgs are found in myth as the next colonisers of Ireland, that is, after the Nemedians. Varying traditions say that they came from Greece or from Spain, which was a post-Christian euphemism for the Celtic Hades. They consisted of 3 tribes called the Fir Danann, the men of Danu, the Fir Gallion, or the men of Gallion, and the Fir Bolg, or men of Bolg. But in spite of the fact that the first named tribe was the most important, they are usually called collectively after the last, that is, Fir Bolg. Curious stories are told of their life in Greece and how they came to Ireland, but these are somewhat factitious and obviously do not belong to the earliest tradition. He does say factitious and not fictitious. At the time of their domination, they had, we are told, partitioned Ireland among them. The Fir Bolg held Ulster. The Fir Danann, divided into 3 kingdoms, occupied North Munster, South Munster and Connacht, while the Fir Gallion owned Leinster. These 5 provinces met at a hill then called Balor's Hill, but afterwards called, go on, yeah, you know it already, the Hill of Uisneach. It is near Rathconrath in the county of Westmeath, and was believed in early times to mark the exact centre of Ireland. They held the country from the departure of the people of Nemed to the coming of the people of the goddess Danu, and during this period they had 9 supreme kings. At the time of the arrival of the gods, their king's name was Yuchi, son of Urk, surnamed the Proud. And of course many kings in the Irish myths are called Yuchi. We have practically no other details regarding their life in Ireland. It is obvious, however, that they were not really gods, but the pre-Aryan race which the Gaels, when they landed in Ireland, found already in occupation. There are many instances of peoples at a certain stage of culture regarding tribes in a somewhat lower one as semi-divine, or rather half-diabolical. The suspicion and fear with which the early Celts must have regarded the savage Aborigines made them seem larger than human. They feared them for the weird magical rites which they practised in their inaccessible forts among the hills, amid storms and mountain mists. The Gaels, who held themselves to be the children of light, deemed these dark Iberians children of the dark. Their tribal names seem to have been, in several instances, founded upon this idea. There were the Corca Ica, people of darkness. I presume it's Oidce, which I think is like an earlier Irish rendering of Icha, as in night, and the Corca Duine, or Dovna, people of the night. The territory of the western tribe of the Hidorchia, the Sons of Dark, was called the Night Country. The Celts, who held their own gods to have preceded them into Ireland, would not believe that even the Tuatha Dé Danann could have wrested the land from these magic-skilled Iberians without battle. They seem also to have been considered as in some way connected to the Fomors. Just as the largest Iberian tribe was called the Men of Danu, so the Fomors were called the gods of Danu, and Indech, one of their kings, is a son of Danu. Thus, eternal battle between the gods, children of Danu, and the giants, children of Donu, would reflect in the supernatural world the perpetual warfare between invading Celt and resisting Iberian. It is shadowed too in the later heroic cycle. The champions of Ulster, Aryans and Gaels par excellence, have no such bitter enemies as the Fir Danann of Munster and the Fir Gallion of Leinster. A few scholars would even see in the later death struggle between the High King of Ireland and his rebellious Fenians the last historic or mythological adumbration of racial war. The enemies alike of Fir Bolg and Fomor, the Tuatha Dé Danann, gods of the Gaels, were the next to arrive. What is probably the earliest account tells us that they came from the sky. Later versions, however, give them a habitation upon earth, some say in the north, others in the southern isles of the world. They had dwelt in 4 mythical cities called Findias, Gorias, Murias and Falias, where they had learned poetry and magic. To the primitive mind, 2 not very dissimilar things. And whence they had brought to Ireland their 4 chief treasures. From Findias came Nuadu's sword, from whose stroke no one ever escaped or recovered. From Gorias, Lugh's terrible lance. From Murias, the Dagda's cauldron. And from Falias, the Stone of Fall, better known as the Stone of Destiny, which afterwards fell into the hands of the early kings of Ireland. According to legend, it had the magic property of uttering a human cry when touched by the rightful king of Éireann. Some have recognised in this marvellous stone the same rude block which Edward I brought from Scone in the year 1300 and placed in Westminster Abbey, where it now forms part of the coronation chair. It is a curious fact that, while Scottish legend asserts this stone to have come to Scotland from Ireland, Irish legend should also declare that it was taken from Ireland to Scotland. This would sound like conclusive evidence, but is nonetheless held by leading modern archaeologists, including Dr. W.F. Skane, who has published a monograph on the subject, that the stone of Scone and the stone of Tara were never the same. And just in case you're reading some wild conspiracy theories on the internet, be very careful to make sure that, with regard to that whole idea, that you pursue all of the sources. Dr. Petrie identifies the real Lugh foil with a stone which has always remained in Ireland, and which was removed from its original position on Tara Hill in 1798 to mark the tomb of the rebels buried close by under a mound now known as the Croppy's Grave. Whether the Tuatha Dé Danann came from earth or heaven, they landed in a dense cloud upon the coast of Ireland. It was actually the west coast. The coast of Ireland on the mystic 1st of May. There we go, there's Bealtaine again. Without having been opposed, or even noticed by the people whom it will be convenient to follow the manuscript authorities in calling the Fir Bolgs. That those might still be ignorant of their coming, the Morrigan, helped by Bab and Magh, made use of the magic they had learned in Findius, Gorius, Murius and Fallius. They spread druidically formed showers and fog-sustaining shower clouds over the country, and caused the air to pour down fire and blood upon the Fir Bolgs, so that they were obliged to shelter themselves for 3 days and 3 nights. But the Fir Bolgs had druids of their own, and in the end they put a stop to these enchantments by counter-spells, and the air grew clear again. The Tuatha Dé Danann, advancing westward, had reached a place called the Plain of the Sea in Leinster when the two armies met. And I'm presuming that is, it doesn't give the Irish here, but I'm presuming that's Magh the plain covered by the sea. Each sent out a warrior to parley. The two adversaries approached each other cautiously, their eyes peeping over the tops of their shields. Then, coming gradually nearer, they spoke to one another, and the desire to examine each other's weapons made them almost friends. The envoy of the Fir Bolgs looked with wonder at the beautifully shaped, thin, slender, long, sharp-pointed spears of the warrior of the Tuatha Dé Danann, while the ambassador of the tribe of the goddess Danu was not less impressed by the lances of the Fir Bolgs, which were heavy, thick, pointless, but sharply rounded. They agreed to exchange weapons, so that each side might, by an examination of them, be able to come to some opinion as to its opponent's strength. Before parting, the envoy of the Tuatha Dé Danann offered the Fir Bolgs, through their representative, peace with the division of the country into 2 equal halves. Pardon me. And there is an aspect of Irish mythology that is repeated throughout the invasion myths, and that is the division or the partition of Ireland. The Fir Bolg envoy asked his people to accept this offer, but their king Yuchi, son of Urk, would not. "If we once give these people half," he said, "they will soon have the whole." The people of the goddess Danu were, on the other hand, very much impressed by the sight of the Fir Bolg's weapons. They decided to secure a more advantageous position, and, retreating farther west into Connacht, oh my god, I'm tired, to a plain then called Nia, now Moitura, near the present village of Cong, they drew up their line at its extreme end, in front of a pass of Balcatan, which offered a retreat in case of defeat. The Fir Bolgs followed them and encamped upon the nearer side of the plain. Then, Nuada, king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, sent an ambassador offering the same terms as before. Again, the Fir Bolgs declined them. "Then when," asked the envoy, "do you intend to give battle?" "We must have a truce," they said, "for we want time to repair our armour, burnish our helmets, and sharpen our swords. Besides, we must have spears like yours made for us, and you must have spears like ours made for you." Sounds fair, doesn't it? Everybody wants things to be equal before the battle starts. The result of this chivalrous but, to modern ideas, amazing parley was that a truce of 105 days was agreed upon. It was on Midsummer Day that the opposing armies at last met. The people of the goddess Danu appeared in a flaming line, wielding their red-bordered, speckled and firm shields. Opposite to them were ranged the Fir Bolgs, sparkling, brilliant and flaming, with their swords, spears, blades and trowel spears. The proceedings began with a kind of deadly hurley match, at which thrice 9 of the Tuatha Dé Danann played the same number of the Fir Bolgs, and were defeated and killed. I'm going to have to stop soon. I need to go to bed. That's an interesting one. I'm just making a note of that. The deadly hurley match. That's something I'm very interested in. Then followed another parley to decide how the battle should be carried on, whether there should be fighting every day or only on every second day. Moreover, Nuada obtained from Lugh an assurance that the battles should always be fought with equal numbers, although this was, we are told, very disagreeable to the Fir Bolg king, because he had largely the advantage in the numbers of his army. Then warfare recommenced with a series of single combats, and like those of the Greeks and Trojans in the Iliad. At the end of each day, the conquerors on both sides went back to their camps and were refreshed by being bathed in healing baths of medicinal herbs. So the fight went on for 4 days, with terrible slaughter upon each side. A Fir Bolg champion called Sreng fought in single combat with Nuada, the king of the gods, and shore off his hand and half his shield with one terrific blow. Lugh, the king of the Fir Bolgs, was even less fortunate than Nuada, for he lost his life. Suffering terribly from thirst, he went with 100 of his men to look for water, and was followed and pursued as far as the strand of Ballysadare in Sligo. Here he turned to bay, but was killed, his grave still being marked. Here he turned to bay, but was killed, his grave being still marked by a tumulus. The Fir Bolgs, reduced at last to 300 men, demanded single combat until all upon one side were slain. But sooner than consent to this, the Tuatha Dé Danann offered them a 5th part of Ireland, whichever province they might choose. Does that sound like something? I've said it before, that we continue to live out our history. They offer them a 5th part of Ireland, a coquage, in the old Irish, a province was called a coquage, which basically meant a 5th. This sounds like 1916 and the battle for independence, and Michael Collins talking to the British and offering them a 5th part. Well, I'm not sure that he offered them that, but that's what they demanded. This constant idea of Ireland being cut up or partitioned or divided. In the case of a battle or a fight or some sort of strife between two peoples. They agreed and chose Connacht, a mighty fine choice, ever afterwards their especial home, and where, until the middle of the 17th century, men were still found tracing their descent from Sreng. The whole story has a singularly historical, curiously unmythological air about it, which contrasts strangely with the account of the other battle of the same name, which the Tuatha Dé Danann waged afterwards with the Fomorians, and that is the Second Battle of Moytura. The neighbourhood of Cong still preserves both relics and traditions of the fight. Upon the plain of southern Moytura, as it is called to distinguish it from the northern Moytura of the second battle, are many circles and tumuli. These circles are especially numerous near the village itself, and it is said that there were formerly others which have been used for making walls and dikes. Large cairns of stones, too, are scattered over what was certainly once the scene of a great battle. These various prehistoric monuments each have their still-told story, and Sir William Wilde, as he relates in his Loch Corrib, and that is, William Wilde is the father of Oscar Wilde, was so impressed by the unexpected agreement between the details of the legendary battle as he read them in the ancient manuscript, and the traditions still attaching to the mounds, circles and cairns, that he tells us he could not help coming to the conclusion that the account was absolutely historical. Certainly the coincidences are curious. His opinion was that the Fir Bolgs were a colony of Belgae, and that the Tuatha Dé Danann were Danes. But the people of the goddess Danu are too obviously mythical to make it worthwhile to seek any standing ground for them in the world of reality. In their superhuman attributes, they are quite different from the Fir Bolgs. In the epical cycle, it is made as clear that the Tuatha Dé Danann are divine beings, as it is that the Fir Bolg, the Fir Donnan and Fir Gallion stand on exactly the same footing as the men of Ulster. Later history records by what Milesian kings and on what terms of rack rent the three tribes were allowed settlements in other parts of Ireland than their native Connacht. They appear in ancient, medieval and almost modern chronicles as the old race of the land. The truth seems to be that the whole story of the war between the gods and the Fir Bolgs is an invention of comparatively late times. In the earliest documents there is only one battle of Tuireadh, fought between the people of the goddess Danu and the Fomorians. The idea of doubling it seems to date from after the 11th century. And its inventor may very well have used the legends concerning this battlefield, where two unknown armies had fought in days gone by, in compiling his story. It never belonged to the same genuine mythological stratum as the legend of the original battle fought by the Tuatha Dé Danann, the gods of the Gaels, against the Fomors, the gods of the Iberians. And that is where I am going to leave it for the moment. We have been going for over an hour. Wow. Hello, Keith. And Adele is there. Hi, Adele. So that is it for the moment. The next chapter will deal with the coming of, or the rise of the sun god, and then we will have the Gaelic Argonauts and the conquest of the gods by mortals, but not tonight, because we've got to leave more for the next time. And so I may make this story reading a regular feature while this coronavirus scare is going on, just as I say, to help relax people and just to take people's minds off things. There don't seem to be any more questions. I'm gathering that Facebook is suppressing posts again, because despite the fact that Mythical Ireland has 53,000 followers, this post is only being watched right now by 16 people, and there are only 27 likes and 25 comments. So undoubtedly this is being suppressed again. I will try and download a version of it and upload that to YouTube on the YouTube channel. So yeah, can't promise that it'll be tomorrow night, because Friday night I usually relax and have a little bit of food and a glass of wine with my other half. So there you go, letting you in on a secret. But we'll take it up sooner rather than later and do another one. And I would welcome suggestions for reading material. Just bear in mind that if I'm going to read long tracts for copyright purposes, it's better that I read from publications that are out of copyright. So unless you just, at some point, we just sit down and just have a chat, and we do a questions and answers, or I try to talk about myths from heart without reading them from a book. So Mellow Nello says, thank you so much. Looking forward to the next one. Yeah, me too. Thanks for joining us. Freya says, fascinating. Thank you. You're very welcome. And Esther, amazing reading. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed. Wishing you and your family all the best for a very peaceful night. And the same to all of the rest of you out there in the virtual world and the real world. So thanks everyone, and I'll save this video so you'll be able to rewatch it on the Facebook page but I'll also try to download it and upload a copy of it to YouTube. And the details for that are youtube.com/Mythical Ireland. I should probably mention that if you want to support my work, you can do so. You can make a very small monthly donation at patreon.com. That's patreon.com. Actually, I'll type it in as a comment. patreon.com/Mythical Ireland. If you're willing to give me a $5 a month or more, you get rewards. You get early and exclusive access to things like podcasts and videos and blog posts and photographs. You get to see a lot of stuff much sooner than other people. So maybe pop along to patreon.com/Mythical Ireland and become a contributor. Your input would be greatly appreciated. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you for the next one, hopefully in a few days' time.